Hey folks, it's Regular Guy here, and today I'm talking about not Karl Marx. In fact, if you look at the screen here, it looks like I'm talking about coffee. Uh, Dutch trading coffee, looks 1968, okay? This book. All right, that's not Karl Marx. That's not Karl Marx. All right, so who cares? Well, I don't know. I think if you're looking at like current events, trying to make sense of things, trying to make sense of like what a country like America is doing overseas. Okay, um, you could use like a do like a Marxist analysis of this and this and that, and look for like some inequalities and some capitalist exploitation, this and this and that. Um, you know, that's how most people would do it. Uh, and that's unfortunate, I think, because this author offered, I think, another way of kind of examining those kinds of scenarios, those kinds of situations. Now, this author says Multatuli. All right, that was the name that this person used at the time that this person wrote this book. They didn't feel comfortable using their real identity because this person had worked for the Dutch government and they were exposing some scandals, okay, about, well, some, yeah, some scandals, okay, let's say some. This author was pointing out some aspects of Dutch colonial policy that hadn't been really made public, okay? Now, this author, I think, was expecting to maybe like have some influence, maybe get a job on MSNBC or something as a commentator. I don't know. Uh, but I don't know if that really happened. The book, though, was scandalous. Okay, it had some impact. Okay, it made people in the Netherlands feel really bad. Um, they just felt guilty. They were like, oh, we had no idea. All right, now it's a little bit like what Karl Marx is trying to do. Okay, he's saying, hey, in London, all these factory workers are getting exploited. And, he was writing in the context of London during the Industrial Revolution. Now, back up a little bit here. This book isn't about English people. It wasn't written by an English person. It was written by a Dutch author. Now, the Dutch, uh, they had a golden age in like the 17th century. Okay. Now, way some people define a golden age, I kind of like this definition. Um, It's when people don't really, people are so rich that they can just make art. You know, you can just make a living just making art. This is like some gigapixel uh, version of a painting by a Dutch artist from that era. Okay, so that's how rich the Dutch were. Like 200 years before Marx was dealing with all that industrial revolution stuff, and Holland stayed pretty rich. Okay, so they didn't have to go through all that industrialization stuff that England had to go through, because they were bringing in coffee through this trading company. Now, coffee's coming out of this place called Java. We'll get to that, uh, but this right here is an English translation. Now it's an early English translation. There may be better English translations. I don't know. I like reading old stuff, so I'm gonna read the oldest version of it I could find. Okay, so the original was published, I think, in 1860, and then in 1868, this English translation comes out, and the author of this English translation tells you up front that he's got an agenda. You know, he's saying, look, the person who wrote this was saying it was all true. Um, in Amsterdam in 1863, he challenged his countrymen to refute him, but there was no champion to accept the challenge. So not a single fact was ever contested. Now, they don't say that, he ended up getting rich and famous off this book, okay? Doesn't say that. But look at this. It says the book proves that what was formerly written in Uncle Tom's Cabin of the cruelties perpetrated upon the slaves in America is nothing in comparison to what happens every day in the Dutch Indies. Now, you know, the first thing that occurs to me is that the person writing this is English, okay? Had no stake in the outcome of the Civil War, presumably, and didn't really care about slavery in the U.S., but was still nonetheless like shocked by it. All right, because that's what he was reaching for. He's like trying to think, like, what's the worst thing I can think of? Oh, it's slavery in America. And then he says, well, this is even worse. So, there you go. That was America's reputation. He wasn't writing this to Americans. He was writing this to people in England. Now he talks about this guy, Mr. Drystall. All right. The author openly declared that he belonged to neither the Liberal nor the Conservative Party, but he placed himself under the banner of right, equity, and humanity. So this person who wrote this book under this fake name, later got outed, okay? Like people found out who it was. But, he wasn't on board with any of the existing parties in Holland, okay? Yeah, we know about. All right, fine, we'll get to that. But then he says this book is immortal, not because of literary art or talent. Yeah, that's true. But because of the cause he advocates. Now, he could say the same thing about Marx, okay? I mean, well, in some ways, maybe Marx got more attention because he's a better writer, okay? This person wasn't, I would say, a real talented writer. But anyway, this person also was writing to, I guess, a limited audience at that time. And so the book didn't really catch fire outside of, the Netherlands where it was relevant. And so it's not a book that anyone would think to pick up today and read in light, of current events, right? They'd be more likely to read something by Marx, if anything. All right, or at least something that was written by someone who's applying a Marxist framework for analyzing things, and seeing everything as I don't know, a dialectic. Anyway, so all right, then he talks about British India down here. Whoever wrote this, Alphonse Johann Bernard Horst. I'm not going there, but The Hague wrote it in Netherlands, 1868. So good on whoever took the time to do this because, all right, need to be done. All right, so the book is also not written at all the way Marx writes things. Marx says, hey, I'm going to tell you how the world works. This book is really like, it tries to be devious. It's kind of ham-handed. So the author claims to be a coffee broker who lives at number 37 Laurier Canal, whatever, Amsterdam. And he says, oh, I'm just, a coffee broker. I don't write novels or whatever. And, it would take this video. I want to keep it as short as I can, so I don't want to dwell on too much here. But this author's saying, I don't normally care for novels, just care about coffee. Don't like, I like everything to be logical and sensible, except I make exception for the Bible, haha, right? That's kind of silly. Anyway, he's going on and he starts complaining about how the youth of today are too quick to believe all this fictional garbage that's put out in the theaters, like this notion that babies are born from cabbage patches or something. He's like, I know that's not how it really works, whatever. These people go around believing in all these fictions, and I know the truth about Holland and why we're great and why we're strong. In the movies, they show the poor girl. She's just like sewing, and she's not really that poor. She has time to give lectures to the audience, and she's not really poor. And people get in the habit of believing this stuff, and it's all garbage. And in reality, talks about like yeah, here he is talking about the girl on stage sewing. He's like, no rich guy would ever come and marry that woman in real life. It's just people believe this stuff, whatever. So he's pretending to be this like just cranky old businessman with really nothing to say. Nothing interesting to say except, I'm in the coffee business, right? Um, Now he does say, hey, those of us in the coffee business, we know how the real world works. We know how to count pennies. We're smart. Um, he's like, one of the things we know is that there's no money in being good, like virtue. That doesn't pay. All right. Now, I don't know. Marx might have agreed sort of like, with something similar, right? It had like labor theory of value or something, right? This guy's saying, hey, just being virtuous, that doesn't generate value, right? It doesn't create wealth, So why do we, create all these fictional worlds where, the hero is rewarded for virtue? Gives an example of, a play where a rich person falls in the water and a homeless person saves them, and the rich person gives him half his fortune. And he says, I would never do that because if I fell in the water twice, I'd become bankrupt. And, so if you see me in the water and you think you're entitled to half my money, just let me drown. All right. So he's really obnoxious. All right. Business is slack on the coffee exchange, whatever. This guy is, again, fake. He's just set up to be like kind of a dummy. It's not Marx, right? Marx tries to just be an anthropologist or whatever, and this guy is sort of sociologist, and it's like, I just sell coffee. All right. Now he's got a thing about Germans. He hired a German at some point, or a guy who could speak German. Okay. I think he says like sometimes I got to do business in Germany, so I had to hire like somebody who spoke German. Okay. And then he says, then he gives his name down here. My name's Dry Stubble. It's so stupid. My name Dry Stubble. Okay. So anyway, he's out, just minding his own business, waiting for the bus or whatever. And some stranger says, hey, Dry Stubble, don't you know me? And he's like, I don't know you. And then he's like, wait a minute. You that guy who saved me from getting beat up, by a Greek guy like 20 years ago, It turns out that, yeah, there's some like stupid incident that happened where uh, the coffee trader, when he was like 16, tried to hit on this Greek girl who was 18. And then the Greek woman's father came out and tried to beat him up. And then a stranger intervened. All right. And saved him. All right. And then I guess the Greek guy beat him up instead. And then the coffee trader or the future coffee trader escaped. All right. And then now this person on the street is saying, hey, I'm that guy. Don't you remember me? And he's like, hey, yeah, Now, his first thought is, I should thank this guy. But he notices two things about him. First of all, he's not wearing like fine clothes. He's just wearing a shawl. So he calls him Shawl Man. Right? That's the name he gives him, Shawl Man. And then the other thing is the guy doesn't seem to know what time of day it is. And that really bothers Dry Stubble, the coffee trader. And he's like, why would I want to talk to somebody who doesn't even know what time of day it is? All right, so tries to get away from him, but whatever. Shawman keeps following him, says, hey, wait a minute, I need a favor, and gets away. All right, so this like Scrooge-like fellow now, the coffee trader, turns out that he made the mistake of giving his business card to Shawman. So Shawman tracked him down and sent him a parcel full of letters. Okay, like a parcel full of like memoranda and stuff, like things that this guy had written, notes and journals and whatever. Okay, and then there was a letter attached to it where he said, I'm kind of like a good writer, and I need somebody to publish my stuff, and the publishers won't take me because I don't have any reputation. They don't know who I am, and they'll only publish, people who have famous names and stuff like that. Now, Dry Stubble doesn't like the letter. He's like, this guy's, he thinks the publishers are right. He says, we judge the coffee according to the reputation of the trademark, okay? So why wouldn't a publisher judge the quality of a piece of writing based on the reputation, the name of the author, right? And this Shawl man is saying in this letter, no, my work needs to be published in order to be understood. Okay. So, this is one way. Again, this is not Marx. I mean, it's really inverted, okay, the way that you have to approach this as you're reading it, okay? It's written in this like tongue in cheek style, okay? So, anyway, the story is that uh, Dry Stubble ends up with the parcel. The parcel's got all kinds of writings in it, and Dry Stubble doesn't want to have anything to do with it. But then his 16-year-old son, I guess, gets into it and finds, I guess, a story that talks about human reproduction. Okay. So he mentioned cabbage earlier, babies being born in cabbage. He says, of cabbage and such things we do not speak. There's the son found this, filthy, dirty pornography in the parcel. So he's like, hey, his son's name's Fred. He's like, Fred, get out of there. Let me, and then he starts going through the parcel to see if there's any, see if there's any other smutty material in there that might, doesn't want his kids to read. And when he finds in there is a treatise that's called Account of the Coffee Culture and the Residency of Manado. Okay. Now, Manado is now currently a part of Indonesia. It's up in Sulawesi. And it's true, there's a lot of coffee that comes out of there. And this guy says, my heart leapt for joy because I'm a coffee broker and Manado is a very good mark. So he sees this in there and he's like, wow, there might be, Shawl man. He's got some information I may be able to use for my business, tucked away in here. So he starts going through the parcel. Now, he's got a couple problems going on here. First of all, the thing's written in German. And he's Dutch. This author claims to be Dutch. And he's like, I can't read German. It's like I trained in Latin, but I can't read German. But he had that German translator that he hired earlier. All right. But anyway, as he could tell as he was going through the material that the information would be useful to coffee brokers. Okay. Be useful to businessmen like him. He says, and it seems to me, too, that ship owners are in some measure interested in it. And the commercial marine. And then, sailmakers maybe, and ministers of finance, and all these people might be interested in some of the stuff I'm finding in here. And, clergymen and vendors of Holloway's pills. Those who live on the national debt. Butchers, brokers, clerks, shareholders in the Dutch Trading Company. In fact, maybe even the king might be interested in some of the stuff that I'm finding in this parcel. It's not Marx. Okay. So I found in there. Now, he decides that he's going to, this is kind of stupid, but the way they wrote it. Okay, so he's got this German translator, Stern. He's like, okay, I'm going to have Stern translate all this stuff into Dutch. Okay. And we're going to turn it into something we can publish because we think we can use it to inform like the business community. Okay, that's the deal. And the deal is like Stern can't alter anything. My son's going to do some of the grammar errors, the proofreading. I'll be able to, add a chapter where I give my thoughts here and there. We know what the title is going to be called. We've got that worked out. No immorality, okay? No more of that stuff. Okay, and he doesn't want his name, on the title page because he's a coffee broker. Okay. So anyway, and then Stern gets some publishing rights for German, French, and English translations of the book. Okay, so that's nice. All right, so anyway, what else? Oh, got to send Schallman pens, papers, and ink. Now that's weird because he just told Schallman to, get lost, and now he's just going through Schallman's stuff, and he wants to send Schallman some papers and ink. Well, it turns out that what happened was Schallman reached out to Stern at some point and formed a relationship with Stern, sort of like Engels formed with Marx. Okay, and so Dry Stubble, this coffee merchant. He goes to find Shulman, but can't get in touch with him. And it's only afterward that he finds out that Shulman had come to his house and had talked to Stern. Okay. And so now Dry Stubble's losing some control over what's going to come out of this. All right. That's the idea, is that Stern is going to translate these works written in German. He's going to translate them to Dutch. Okay. So that they can be published to Dutch merchants. But Dry Stubble doesn't know what the stuff says until Stern does the translation, and it's up to Stern how he does the translation. And it turns out they need Schallman's help because even though the stuff's written in German, it contains a lot of local or Javanese or Malay terminology and local references that require Schallman's input, and that's why they had to get Schallman the pens. And so it turns out that they have to bring Schallman into the project to complete the book. So that's the long-winded way of this person getting his autobiography out there to the public. Okay, it's really awkward, and it's not Marx, and it's just the way it is. Okay, so the parts that say like composed by Stern, like what we're seeing right here, these are the parts where he is his, not Marx. Okay. And then there's other passages where the coffee broker, jumps in and starts editorializing, right? And then it goes back to the parts that are translations by Stern. Okay. Now, what Stern is translating is supposed to be the writings of a talented but unpublished journalist who's writing about this tragic character that he encountered in the East Indies. And he's named Max Havelaar. The book's named after him. Now, confusingly, he also has a son named Max. Or Max or whatever. So there are times where he's like yelling at his son and he's calling him Max, and it just says Max, and you think that they're talking about him, but they're not talking about him, they're talking about his son. I think there's only one part in the book where they actually tell you that the father's name is also Max. So anyway, it starts off with this author saying, there's nothing in Europe that remotely compares to the experience of like setting foot in this territory. It's like the first thing that happens, you get on a carriage and it's like Tokyo Drift everywhere. It's just nuts. There's only one good road built by this general, the rest of the roads, they don't even look like roads. The horses are, just totally different from our horses. You ride in a carriage and you're screaming, "Oh God, we're going to go down a precipice. There's no road." Just the minute you set foot in this territory, okay, everything's different. So that's just the carriage ride. They're talking about the carriage ride. And then they're like, the people of Java, they laugh at that, the danger. They laugh at danger, basically. They don't care. All right. It's not very flattering to Western civilization that the enthusiasm for an extensive work has very seldom prevailed long enough to see that work finished. Now, what he's talking about here is like the way that they build buildings over there. Okay, he's saying they don't put a lot of effort into constructing Western style buildings because the locals there aren't really spun up to build something like the cathedral, or a cathedral or something like that. So the buildings are just kind of junk. But he starts off the story here about this town called Lebach. Okay, it's kind of set in that town, and the narrative here doesn't go in I would say totally chronological order here. Okay, but it starts off with a description of the regent of Lebach. Okay, now this is a local. Okay. This is somebody who's native to the region, the regent. Okay. And we're going to learn that the regent is like a prince. All right. And that this is kind of a feudal society. All right. But at this point, it's also formally a Dutch colony. And the Dutch run it using these people called residents. Okay. Or in this case, an assistant resident. Now, I'll pause here for a minute and say that when the author wrote this book, it was full of details that only a colonial insider would know. Okay, that's part of what made it scandalous, is that the book goes into exhausting detail about about how the Dutch administered Java. Okay, um, and only an insider who had spent time in the Dutch government would know all the things that this guy does. That this guy knows. All right. So he's very specific with the terms that he uses, like regent, okay, and controller. All right. In this book, these words all have very precise meanings that the author wants us to remember as we read through the book. Now, that also makes it, again, a difficult book to read because these aren't words that we're used to working with. Regent, controller, and then, um, the assistant resident, okay? That doesn't sound like a powerful person, but that's actually what the title character is. He's an assistant resident, and it turns out that an assistant resident is a very powerful person, and a controller is, like his vice president or something. And then the regent is the highest level official within the native government that exists beneath the European government. All right. So he says, I must explain the machinery of government in these regions. So again, this is not Marx. Okay, Marx tries to take you through generic description of capitalist economy and how all that works. This author is saying, I'm taking you inside one colonial administration run by one European country on one island in the Pacific Ocean. And I'm going to tell you how that works. I'm going to write 400 pages about that. Okay. And then I think you can already tell from what I've said in this video so far that this author is going to tell us that the whole thing is immoral. And that the people of Holland should be ashamed, okay, of all the human suffering that's occurring in the Indies, okay. I mean, that's the bottom line. There's no better way to put it, okay. Now, let's talk for a minute about the government, all right, that he's got there. That the Dutch, had in place in the Indies at that time. I put in green here the portions that describe the locals. Okay, the locals are just like kings and princes, basically, like estate holders. Okay, for whatever reason, they claim ownership to a big piece of land, and then there are like laborers out there who grow rice, but not for money. They just like to eat. Okay, they grow rice to eat. And then if the landowner needs something like wants some servants to work in his home or needs some people to tidy up the yard or whatever, he can. He doesn't have to actually order anyone to do it. He just has to make it known that he wants it done, and people will do it sort of out of devotion. Okay. So there's no, all right. Now, the thing is, at this point, this entire system, this native system exists underneath the Dutch colonial administration. So at this point, he says the Javanese is a Dutch subject. All right. Now, there's a governor general who's like in charge of the like the president of the Dutch East Indies, okay, the governor general. And there's a Senate, but there's no real separation of powers. What the Senate does is it passes, laws that are then handed down to the locals. And the locals are told this is, you're subject of Holland, you have to follow Dutch law. So this is the Dutch law that you have to follow, okay? But then you have to go implement it at, your way, using your customary government to make our Dutch law have an effect. Now he says the word resident says it really obscures, the truth here. Okay, again, this is kind of an expose. He's saying its origins date from a time when Holland acted as a protector, right, not a superior. Says The positions change, but the name remains. So you could kind of put the word P in front of there and call it president. It's kind of what he's saying. Okay. All right. So these people represent the Dutch authority in the eyes of the Javanese population. Okay. Now, these Javanese people, they don't know a damn thing about what's really going on with these residents. Okay. They don't know about the governor general. They don't know about the Senate. They don't know about directors at Batavia. I guess those would be like the people who run the company. These Javanese people don't know anything about any of that stuff. Okay. Now, residency can have as many as 1 million people. Okay. Divided into 3, 4, 5 departments or regencies, at the head of which is an assistant regent. And then he says, under the assistant regent, you got controllers, overseers. That's a familiar sounding word, isn't it? And a number of other officers who are required for the gathering of the taxes, the superintendents of agriculture, the erection of buildings, waterworks, police, administration of justice. Okay. These are all Dutch. That's why I put them in orange, because these people are all going to be Dutch and they're all going to work under the resident. And that's going to, and 1 million people is a lot of people for anyone to be in charge of in the 19th century. Okay. Populations weren't nearly as big as they are now. And even these assistant residents, had a lot of people under them. All right. And then in green, you got the government that sits underneath this assistant resident. This is the local government. Okay. That's going to be run by a native chief of high rank with the title of regent. Okay. So the regent is going to be not going to be Dutch. Okay. They're going to be Javanese. All right. A high aristocrat. All right. No questions asked. All right. We don't know. The Dutch are there and they're like, okay, the locals think you're a king, or the locals seem to think you're a prince, so we're going to treat you like a prince. We don't know why they think you're a prince. We don't care, right? We need a prince. We need to find some. We want to know who's in charge. Take me to your leader. That's how they were when they got to these islands out in the Indies, right? It's the first question they ask: who's in charge around here? Okay, we're going to talk to them. All right. There's nothing new under the sun. All right. I put that in purple there. Okay. All right. There really isn't. He says here, the Romans, they put their military in charge of people and they just said, like, you're subjects. Okay. We're subjugating you. He says, seems like Germans kind of do that stuff. This is like a Dutch person trying to reflect on how things get done. They don't have that many other examples. They're just like, yeah, it looks like people just put each other under the boot. All right. So anyway, that's what we did. We went, Dutch people showed up, Java, and they just, put people under, just subjugate them. But anyway, you still have, as a practical matter, okay, these Dutch people aren't about to start learning Javanese, okay? And they're also not about to, teach all these Javanese people how to speak Dutch. They're not really interested in like winning hearts and minds, okay? So um, there's a layer of separation, many layers of separation between these Dutch people and just any ordinary random Javanese person that you pick out of a rice field, okay? There's basically no circumstances under which those two should ever speak to each other, okay? If the Dutch are talking to anybody, they're talking to local aristocrats, okay? And if the local people are talking to anybody, they're talking to the local aristocrats. Okay, that's supposed to be how it works, more or less. All right. Now he talks about the assistant resident, because again, the main character of this book is going to be an assistant resident, and I think the author, we were told at the beginning, was also an assistant resident. Okay, so the book's like an autobiographical tell-all, and it's just written in this, really kind of stupid tongue-in-cheek style that makes it kind of impenetrable. But notice this inverted power relationship here that I put in purple. Uh, people do analyze these kinds of things from a Marxist perspective. There are times when they say, yeah, it's true that There are times when rulers are subject to, the obey the will of the masses or something like that. But here he's saying that this happens because um, the Dutch have no other way of getting what they need out of this territory, which is coffee. Okay. Um, Now, trying to think if there's I'm trying to remember if there's a point in the book where they really lay this out neatly. I don't believe there really is. Um, but here's the bottom line: the Dutch want the Indonesians to grow coffee, or the Javanese. They want the Javanese to grow coffee, but the Javanese themselves don't want to grow coffee. They want to grow rice. They want to eat. They have problems. They don't have enough food, generally speaking. They're really poor. Okay, they like live on the brink of starvation all the time. These people. And in fact, I think they tell you early in this book that famine is a recent phenomenon. Okay, in the part of Java where this book is set, that there was a major famine recently, and so nobody's growing coffee right now. If anybody's growing anything, they're growing rice because they got to eat. And so things aren't working out the way they're supposed to in this part of town or in this part of Java. Um, now, that's not normally the way that it would work under the Dutch colonial government. Normally, the way it's supposed to work is that, let's say, 2/3 of the land are set aside to grow rice, and then a third is set aside to grow coffee. Okay. And what happens is every year, um, the local prince tells the landholders that in order to eat rice off that land, they have to produce a certain amount of coffee. Something like that. It's a tax. Okay. And so this forces the peasants to grow coffee on land where they might otherwise grow rice. Okay. In order to meet their tax obligation. Now, the prince is allowed then to keep a percentage, like a commission, okay, on the taxes they raise. So the more coffee they can make the land produce, the richer that prince becomes. But the people that live on that land don't get any of that profit. None of it gets invested in the people. Okay? They're simply given permission to grow rice on the rest of the land that's not being used to produce coffee and then just eat that rice. Okay? There's also sugar, indigo, cinnamon, and a few other things they grow there. Okay. Now, says the reason this is able to work is because just Javanese people by nature, they're just born in rice fields. And all they do, like from the day they're born, is help their parents grow rice. They count their years by harvests. They estimate time by the color of the blades in the field. Okay? Um, the possession of a few buffaloes for plowing is the ideal of his dreams. Okay? So the Donald Trump of Java, if he's not, like a hereditary prince who owns the estate, he's somebody who owns a few buffaloes for plowing. Okay, that's everybody's dream. Okay, it's like owning a private jet. Um, so the cultivation of rice is what the vintage is to the Rhine. It's like growing like wine for us. In the Rhine provinces or in southern France, right? So anyway, foreigners came from out of nowhere. They wanted to profit off of it, and he's saying that's how this all got put in place. Okay. Now what they had to do is they had to persuade the local rulers to go along with this. Okay. They didn't they didn't wage a war to make these people subjects of Holland. They convinced these local princes to agree to become subjects of Holland in exchange for, again, a share in the percentage of the profits generated by the coffee or the sugar or whatever that they produce on the land. Basically anything that's not rice, okay? And so, these princes have no other way of making money because the Dutch monopolize trade in that region, okay? And it's the only way they're really going to make money. If you're a prince and you want to, get like a Rolls Royce or something like that, well, you need money for that. You need access to like a Rolls Royce dealership or something like that. And so the Dutch are providing those kinds of things to princes in the region. And, for the prince, it's a pretty good deal. It works out. That's the division of labor here. Okay. That's what's going on. The government, the Dutch, I put in orange, the Dutch government stuff compels the prince to cultivate certain products, punishes him if he sells what he's produced to any purchaser but the Dutch. The Dutch fix the price. Um, the Dutch, and then they say, the Dutch cover the transportation expenses. Okay. Uh, and that's not cheap. Okay. And we got to make profit. And if we had to like pay money to the people who are growing rice, this just wouldn't be profitable. This just wouldn't work. We just wouldn't do it. Okay. So this whole thing depends. This whole operation requires that these Javanese people live in this like perpetual state of enslavement. Okay. Now he says like, yeah, there's famine over there. Like it's bad. Okay. This author's not gonna um, pull any punches. Okay. Now he says that the Dutch formally have a policy against allowing famine. Okay. In fact, he says they passed a law that says the European market should no longer be pushed to the extremity of famine. Okay. He's like, oh, great. What an angelic parliament. The Dutch parliament says, no, you shouldn't have famine. It's like, that law is like not having any effect here. Okay. All right. Now, and this is where he talks about this kind of slavery. Okay. That like whatever it's not so much it's not even it goes beyond slavery. Okay, the idea is that the prince like owns the land and the people and whatever the people own and can just say give me that. Now the prince doesn't have to say that. Okay. um the prince seems to have these connections to families where he can say like, oh, I really wish I had a horse, that's like, has these features. And then, somebody will look around and see if they've got a horse that has those features. And then they'll say, oh, this is so awesome. I can, win favor or I can show my appreciation for the regent by, providing this horse to him for no cost. So the regent can cast a longing eye on the horse, the buffalo, the daughter, the wife of the poor man, whatever. Um, it would be thought unheard of if he refused the unconditional surrender of the desired object. Okay, so this prince, um, like in European philosophical traditions, there's some hypothetical or maybe apocryphal story about some English king asking if he owned, everything in England, and he was told no because people own like their horses. You can't just claim that you own somebody else's horse, And the King of England had to scratch his head and puzzle over whether that was true. And here, there's no doubt that that's true. Okay, there's no question that this person, this prince, essentially can take whatever he wants out of your hands whenever he wants to. Okay. Um, and furthermore, he doesn't have to take it because you're just going to give it to him the same way that a child gives gifts to their parents, and the parent and the people are constantly trying to provide gifts to the regent, so that the regent, it's almost impolite for the regent to say no. The regent has to say, oh, thank you, and has to show appreciation so that the people can feel like they've actually made the regent happy. Okay. And this author's saying this is a really good, this good custom, this goodwill between the prince and their subjects makes it very hard to cure the abuses, okay, that facilitates. All right. He gives an illustration here. If the front yard of the prince is just unkempt and uncultivated and weeds are just there, his subjects would feel ashamed. Okay. They would run out there and plant flowers and, pretty up that yard or whatever. And it's the same thing, you know, if he's got wheat fields, or I'm sorry, rice fields that aren't irrigated, don't have irrigation canals, they'd be like, oh, that's an embarrassment. We better go get an irrigation canal built and get those, you know, get that rice growing. Okay. And so, you know, all this land belongs to the prince. Okay. He can summon the population of whole villages. All right. And essentially command their labor. And then I put in purple there, you have the abuse. And I don't know if you can, you know, that's probably, I don't think you can describe, you know, slavery in neater terms than that. Okay. The prince owns you and the product of your labor, and you know, you like it. You think that's the only way things you know, can possibly run. Okay. Now it says here, this is, I put in orange what the Dutch know. This is known to the Dutch. You know, the Dutch know this. Okay. The Dutch, like, this is kind of their dirty secret. Okay. Like, everybody in the Dutch government knows it. But the Dutch public doesn't realize that they're profiting off this slavery. Okay. Going back to, like, you know, that painting, like the guy that painted this painting, you know, I mean, he didn't know, you know, that, or presumably didn't know that, you know, slavery was, you know, financed all that stuff he was doing. But you know, it did. That's what this book is saying. Okay. Okay. So anyway, this section of the book tells us that the Dutch government knows this, and you know, they have like ethics rules. Okay, where they tell the colonial administrators that um they shouldn't tolerate abuses. Remember, there's like that no famine rule. Okay. All right. So they got a duty to police against that kind. It's like part of the colonial administrator's duty. Okay. Um, Come up with the coffee. Okay. Produce the sugar and all that, the cinnamon and the cloves and all that stuff. But then, um, you have to ensure that you know, things are done in a like a just and orderly manner or whatever. Okay. Now he says that duty is by no means easy. Uh, yeah, because there's lots of room for abuse and arbitrary power. And let's see, the victims themselves, okay, the Javanese people, for the most part, are accomplices, either from extreme submission or from fear or from distrust of the will or the power of the man whose duty it is to protect them. Okay? So let's think about this for a second. This is an interesting kind of ethnography here. Okay, um, he's trying to figure out why these people are so slave-like. These Javanese people, I mean, they're not complaining. Okay, and he's like, is it? Am I looking at extreme submission, like, like is slave? You know, is just this so deeply ingrained in their culture that it's just, you know, how they behave? Or, you know, are they living in fear? Is somebody threatening them? Or is it just that they don't trust the any of these Dutch people that are saying, like, you know, hey, we're gonna look out for you? You know, they're like, yeah, whatever, man. But anyway, he says, you know, if a man, whatever, if somebody hears that the regent wants his horse, the consequence is that the wished for animal is soon found in the regent's stables. Okay, but this doesn't mean that the regent does not intend to pay handsomely for it sometime or other. And so that makes it hard, okay, to accuse the regent of of doing anything improper, okay? You might suspect that that person gave his horse to the regent because the regent was threatening him, but you can't prove it, okay? The regent might say, "No, I'm planning to, you know, make it up for him, you know, you know, he's gonna get some extra rice down the road, or you know, maybe he'll get a buffalo, you know, or something like that, right? Um, so you can't really prove that a regent's ever abusing their authority. You can suspect it, okay, but you can't prove it. And even if like you thought you could prove it, how the hell would you get witnesses? Okay, how would you get anyone to testify to that? You'd have to find a local Javanese person with the courage to come forth and testify against the regent. Okay, um, and you know, good luck. Okay, and so there's an insurmountable difficulty in keeping the oath to protect the native population against extortion and tyranny. Okay, like these colonial administrators are going out there with an instruction to do that, to protect the native population against extortion and tyranny. And even if they want to do it, they can't. Okay, and that's really what this book is trying to say. Okay, this book is written presumably as an autobiography, but regardless of whether it's entirely factual or not, it's about a Dutch colonial administrator who thinks he's gonna improve the lives of this village. He thinks he knows how to do it. He thinks he's figured out how to do it, and he loses. Okay. Um, he finds himself confronting forces that he doesn't know how to overcome. Okay, so now remember Stern. Stern is telling us the truth. Okay, Dry Stubble's a coffee broker. Whatever. Stern's supposed to be the German translator that's in communication with Schalman and knows the truth. All right, so he's telling us first of all about the controller. Now the controller is a Dutch official, and I said earlier, but I'll say it again. The controller is sort of like sits at the right hand of the assistant resident. Okay, so you've got the governor general first of all, who's like the king or something like that. Who knows? He's like the president. Then you got the resident, who's also sort of like the president because he's got like a million people under him. And then you have the assistant residents who go out and oversee areas that might have 50,000 people, 100,000 people. And then the resident is dependent on the controller typically to interact with the local chiefs. Okay, so the local chiefs are separated, by several degrees from, the people with any real power in the Dutch government. The closest they're typically going to get to anyone is going to be the assistant resident. All right. And usually it's not even going to be the assistant resident, it's going to be the controller. Now, the controller is supposed to, know what's really going on. Okay. The assistant resident's supposed to, sit in an office and just be, counting beans or whatever. And the controller is supposed to know, what's really going on, what people are saying out on the street. Right. So he's supposed to be plain and cordial to those around, kind of a diplomat, okay? Kind of like a spy, okay? The eyes and ears of the assistant resident, all right? Now, when this story begins, the last assistant resident has died mysteriously, and it later becomes apparent that he was probably murdered by the local princes, the regents, or a local regent, okay? And that the locals aren't talking about why or what, they're covering it up, all right? So that happened. But there's still a controller around. Now, the controller doesn't seem to really know exactly what happened. He's not a bad guy, but he just doesn't really know what's going on. Different controllers have different ways of dealing with the chiefs, it says here. But there's kind of this controller Verbruge or something. He's pretty good. Okay, he's pretty good diplomat. He knows to have a conversation start with talking about the weather, and then as the conversation goes along, he figures out how to start talking about the condition of the local roads, not so good. He says in the neighboring area, the what is it, Pandaglang, the road's not so bad. But then the person he's talking to, this local prince, takes that as kind of an insult because he's saying like, "Well, you're saying my neighbor's got better roads." So his response is that, well, they got more people over there. Okay, now he's saying this author's saying in green here. That's why I put it in green. He's like, look, anybody who really knows the customs of dealing with the locals over in Java would know that they're having an argument about whether, the roads in Labak need to be improved. Okay, Labak is the area that they're living in. And he's saying, but this is the way that you do diplomacy with the locals. Okay, that you don't have a face-to-face argument with them. And you got local interpreters there that are helping smooth things over. Everybody's got their posse out there. Okay, I'm not going to try to introduce every single character here because, like I said, this isn't a great book. Okay, even the translator told you it's not a work of art. Okay, they're talking about ordering coffee. Somebody finds out that well, they're making tea out of coffee leaves up in Sumatra. The Dutch. Now, the Dutch, there's a subtext here, which is that some of the people in the room here in this conversation between these officials are Dutch. Some of them are Javanese. The Javanese, these princes may be able to speak some Dutch. Okay, it turns out the Dutch and it turns out that the Dutch typically don't speak any Javanese. If they speak any other language, they speak Malay, which is like a trade language that these different groups can use to communicate with each other. Because you got all these ethnic groups out here that speak all kinds of different languages, but they use Malay, to converse with each other. Again, this is not Marx, okay? This is a detailed examination of one colonial administration, okay? It's not a general work about, colonialism or any of that kind of stuff. Nonetheless, I'm making this video because, I don't want Marx to be the only game in town, okay? When people start thinking about colonialism, however you want to define it, okay, or neo-colonialism or post-colonialism or, the American Empire or whatever you want to call it, okay? Anything you want to say about what's going on today, all right? You could analyze it through a Marxist lens and, look for class tension and say that it's really about capitalism and money doing this and this and that. And here's a case where we still don't know. We still don't have the answers as to why some of these systems of exploitation ever came into existence, or why they persisted for as long as they did, or whether they're still in existence to some extent. Okay, that's the discussion that I think people are still trying to have, and Marx has not given us easy answers. All right. Just saying wealth inequality isn't enough apparently to get us there, because we're still having the arguments about whether and to what extent this kind of stuff is still happening. Anyway, I'll stop editorializing, get back to the book. Okay, so there's a new assistant resident coming into town. All right. And this guy, hang on a second here. I don't know if we're there yet. The common Javanese. Yeah, so all right, well, something happened. First of all, a common Javanese person tried to talk to Verbruge, and that usually doesn't happen. Oh no, he tried to talk to another colonial official, Duclari. That hardly ever happens. Hardly ever the case that an ordinary Javanese person would actually, say, approach a random Dutch person on the street and go, can you please help us with this desperate situation? Okay. And this guy Duclari is like, that wasn't my business. I told him to talk to you, the controller, or go to the new assistant resident. So the new assistant resident, he hasn't shown up yet. That's going to be Max or Mox. Okay. All right. So anyway, what's going on here? There's some other issues there. I mean, the main thing that's going on here is they're not growing any coffee in this land. All right. So anyway, coach shows up, whatever that means back then. The bus. All right. And some gentleman steps out, and some other people are there, and there's a bunch of fancy people, a bunch of VIPs, and it turns out it's the new assistant resident. well, the resident's there too, but the resident's there to inaugurate the new assistant resident. Okay, this guy, he's there. They're gonna get to him at some point. All right, so the resident, he's a dope. He talks slow. Uh, you know, that's what he's like. The resident, just boring. Um, right. What he said was generally well considered, but he's not very good at speaking. Um, some people call his speaking slimy. Okay. All right. Says I've said nothing of Max Havelaar and his wife. Okay. Uh, now here's where they get introduced. Okay, they show up and they've got a child whose name is also Max, and they've got he calls it a babo. I guess that's a servant. Okay. Now the resident, is that dopey, slimy guy. But this guy, Max, he's a little different. First of all, he's not having his servant take care of his little kid. Apparently, that was customary for Dutch colonial people. If they had children over there, that they'd have, local servants that would be taking care of the kid. But this guy, like his wife is taking care of the kid, so it's weird. All right, already. The wife has a noble soul. Okay, all right. So anyway, Max Havelaar is 35. Now, as you might guess, Max Havelaar gets made out to be like a superhero here. I mean, like a really good guy, because, first of all, not too many people had written books about people like Max Havelaar in 1860. Okay, and for that matter, this was meant to be, I guess, like autobiographical, right? The author was when he's writing this as part of like his way of resigning from the Dutch government. He knows if he gets exposed, he might even get arrested or something. He's going to be an enemy of the state. So he wants to portray himself as heroically as possible in this book because he wants people reading it to say, "Wait a minute, no, he's a hero." He's like Edward Snowden or something like that. He wanted people to see him as somebody who spoke truth to power, right? If he got exposed, right, which he did. Anyway, it tells you that this Max Havelaar was a poet in the highest sense of the word. All right. He could tell you about everything. He could tell you about the economic advantages of the Egyptian system of artificial incubation. Okay. No science was entirely unknown to him. He guessed intuitively what he did not know and possessed in a very high degree the gift of using the little he knew in a way that multiplied the measure of his knowledge. Okay. So he's some kind of genius. Okay, this Max Havelaar. All right. He's got different set of values, right? He's real intellectual. He's honest. He's magnanimous. He's a hero. Okay. I don't want to spend too much time, on the portions of the book where they tell you how great Max Havelaar is and what makes him so great and what a philosopher he is. Okay. As you can see, they spend a lot of time here. They tell you that, he's suffered some real hardship, so he's been through shipwreck, fire, insurrection, assassination, war, duels, luxury, poverty, hunger, cholera, love, and loves. I don't know, like, look at all the countries he's been to, okay? Russia, Egypt, India, China, America. He's been everywhere, this guy. He went, what? He even went to Switzerland. All right. So anyway, yeah, his servant, he's not working she doesn't really have, he's not really putting her to work. Okay. It's like he's got this servant that he keeps around, but it's more like just as a favor to her, to keep, to give her a comfortable life. He's not like actually making her do work. Okay. Because this, normally, a house servant, would act like a slave to the child of the Dutch colonial official. Okay. But this woman didn't act like that. This woman didn't act like a slave to Max Havelaar's little kid. So that makes Max Havelaar different, okay, than a ordinary Dutch colonial administrator. Okay. All right. Chapter 7. It's still Stern talking to us here, okay? Which means we're still supposed to be getting the truth, okay? We're getting these heroic descriptions of Max Havelaar. Now, the controller, okay? Remember, the controller is supposed to be like the assistant resident's, eyes and ears. He's supposed to be the one that handles all, that greases palms, right? He's supposed to be the one that delivers the briefcases of cash and all that kind of stuff. Um, but there's still a hierarchy, right? He has to answer to the assistant resident. And so, but Havelaar is like, magnanimous with this guy. He, um, he doesn't, he doesn't treat him like a slave, lets him ride in his coach and stuff like that. But then he also makes it clear to him that, Max Havelaar is trying to make it clear to the controller that he really knows more about what's going on with the locals than the controller does, okay? Because he starts asking the controller for information about, what the taxes have been, and the controller, what kind of taxes the land's produced, and the controller doesn't know the figures, and Max Havelaars already knows the figures, and he knows them going back to 1850 and 1851 and 1843, okay? Max Havelaar's got all this knowledge. He's reciting, and then he stops and tells his son to go, "Hey, look at that horse! Look at how it's jumping!" Because that's the kind of guy he is, right? He's super smart, and he can just off the top of his head start spouting out numbers, and then he's also taking care of his kid. And the controller for Bruges or whatever, he's like, "Yeah, I don't have much to teach this guy because he's such a genius," you know. Now, Max Havelaar also says a couple weird things. He says that regent, uh, he says he needs money. They all say that, right? All the, I need a new Ferrari or something. He's like, hey, I'm gonna forward that guy. I'm gonna give him a loan. You know, he doesn't. I'm not. He doesn't have to wait to collect taxes from these people. I'm gonna forward him a loan. And he also says, I'm glad that there's so much poverty here. I hope to remain here a long time. Okay. Now, the controller doesn't get it. He's like, why the hell are you so happy about people being poor here? And he's like, I don't understand. He doesn't understand what this guy's really talking about. He also doesn't understand the money thing. Let's see. He talks here about, natives and the different classes here. There are, sort of racial categories. Okay, he says there's a racial stratification that's occurring here where there are some natives that are allowed to interact. They might be part Dutch or something like that, and they might speak some Malay. They might speak some Dutch. They might be allowed to traffic with Europeans. Okay, and some of those people might even make their way back to Europe. Okay, and people in Europe encounter these people, and they make fun of their languages and stuff, and they think that they're lower than them because of their race or their dark skin. And he's like, look, um, that's normal. That's how Europeans are. And he brings it now. This is the first time this Dutch person seems to notice England. He's like, hey, look over in England. When these French people came over, these Normans, and conquered the place. They kept, they looked out for each other. Okay, they created an elite aristocracy that they protected, and they looked down on all these English people, and they kept speaking French for a long time, and that's just what Europeans do. Um, and Europeans, they're always just, they're just racist and they're always trying to be dominant and stuff, and like that's just what they're doing. Over here, they're dominating. Okay. Just what Europeans do. They dominate. So they're all dominating over here. All right. Let's see what's going on. He's saying, hey, Max Havelaar or whatever, like I actually don't look down on these people. I'm not like that. I'm all about equality and all that kind of stuff. But, anyway. The promise to protect the native population against oppression and extortion ought to be considered as okay. So um, here, all right, he's reading an oath. Okay, Havelaar is reading an oath, and what he's saying here is that the oaths that that an assistant resident has to repeat when he's sworn into office. The oaths seem to be getting longer and longer over time. Okay, they have to promise to protect the natives against this like growing list of oppressive things like extortion, and whatever, you got to say that you're going to maintain the existing laws. Okay. Um, right. Now he says, a lot of people just repeat this stuff, right? It doesn't really have any effect. It's just more words. Like that's how the Dutch government again approaches this problem of exploitation is it just keeps adding words to the oaths, right? But then this Max Havelaar, he's such a hero that when he recites the oath, you know, he means it, okay? Like he puts his back into it, and really it sounds like it's really coming from him, okay? So, imagine you're watching like C-SPAN footage of some press conference given by the spokesperson for some government agency. Normally those people just sound totally fake, but then suppose you had someone who just sounded like, you know, they were born for this, right? Like it's coming straight from the heart. Like you don't even know if they're reciting an oath or whether they're just talking about, their real feelings, right? This guy, I skipped some green stuff. Let's go back there. Yeah, so the resident gave a speech, and that speech was garbage. There's a point here where let's see. Okay, yeah, all right. We're still talking about Max Havelaar. Okay, he's poor. All right. Because he's 35 years old. He's been too busy trying to help people. He's so magnanimous that he's never actually um, taken the time and effort to enrich himself. But he also expects that he's at some point he's going to make money, and he tells you later on that his wife's kind of the same way. She approved of his entertaining the orphans and all this kind of stuff, even back in Amsterdam. Okay, with gingerbread and almond milk. Guess they had that back then, and toys. Okay. And there was one time there was a family of poor singers, and Max Havelaar paid their hotel bill. The wife was like, "That's okay. She doesn't mind it, even though they're poor. She's okay." And they say down here that it's in part because this guy is such a genius that everybody just figures like someday he's going to become governor general or king, right? That's what it says here at the bottom where I've highlighted it, where it cut it off. Uh, was it not strange that he was not yet a king? Okay, you know. Uh, anyway, um, it's not Marx, it's Mox. Okay. Let's see. So moving on, yeah, it turns out that her family had been rich, but she lost the paperwork, and then Mox tried to find it, but they lost the paperwork, and she's just like, who cares? She's just, I never cared about that money. Isn't it romantic? You know, these two lovebirds that just they both are into like doing good things for the people. Okay, let's see. So yeah, he anyway. Um, they're poorer than they thought they were going to be because whatever, you couldn't track down the wife's money that she was supposed to inherit. So while they're here at Labac, which is already a poor town, they were going to be economical. Okay, they weren't going to have an ostentatious lifestyle. And that really stands in contrast now to the locals. They say here that when the Europeans send over a European, they'll send over like a little squad to, back them up or whatever to help them out. But they're going to keep it small. They're not going to send over, any more people than they absolutely have to. Whereas these Javanese princes, um, they've got, they might have hundreds of people. He mentions here the people of Labac were too poor to become interesting through any increase of poverty. Now, let's think about this for a second. What he's really saying here, they talked about famine earlier. They're not producing any coffee. Okay. No money's coming out of here. So if they have an increase of poverty, we already know that means famine. That means people are going to die. What he's really saying is if all these people starved to death, no one would notice. Okay? It wouldn't be interesting because they weren't producing any coffee to begin with. Okay? And if you're not growing coffee, then you may as well die. All right? That's life out here. All right. So anyway, we shall see how the simple, apparently still life of Labak cost Havilar more than all the former excesses of his heart taken together. Okay, so we're at page 143, and we're about an hour and 15 minutes into this, and I think I stopped around page 188. So, we're three-fourths of the way through the sections of the book that I wanted to share with you. But they tell you right now that this is going to be a tragic ending. Okay, he's not going to save Labak from starvation, and he's not going to become king. Okay, in fact, what goes down here is going to be worse than all that stuff you heard about earlier, the shipwrecks and all that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Now we haven't gotten to the part where Havilar gives his address yet. I think that's coming up here. Yeah, Havilar's got to address the chiefs. Okay. Now it turns out that Havilar speaks Malay. All right. And that's a big deal because that's like a common language, a lingua franca that allow people, I think I said earlier, allow people to communicate. All right, but he could speak it really well. Like all these metaphors flow from his lips. And then, Javanese person who hears this guy would say, "Good God, who are you?" All right, that's how he is. All right, so anyway, he's able to use cogency of reasoning. Okay. Here it says, they talk about how he speaks Malay. Here he says, the simplicity of the Oriental tongues gives to many expressions a force which has been lost in the greater formality of the languages of the West. I don't know. I don't think you can generalize about Asian languages that that like that. Okay, let's say big difference between Malay and Japanese, let's say. But anyway, Havilar, what's he saying? He gives a speech here. Okay, he gives a speech to the locals. Now remember, these locals are like, they enslave all these people. Okay, um, they're like slave owners. Okay, and Havilar is supposed to be there to tell them to, like, you know, go easy on your people. Which kind of runs contrary to the slave owner's interest because they get a commission on the taxes that they raise, right? But anyway, he's got to convince them. And he says, he brings in Allah. He starts talking about Islam, okay? Now, Java at this point was nominally, Muslim. I mean, even today, it's like 95% or something, it was probably about the same back then. But it's kind of syncretic. It used to be Hindu, and they still, there's still a lot of iconography and stuff and whatever they do. They have like parades and holidays and stuff that are left over from Hindu tradition. So it's not perfect Sunni Islam, the way that other people might imagine it. But here's Max Havelaar telling them that whatever, be good Muslims and take care of the poor. Okay, he's bringing in doing that kind of crap. He's saying whatever. The joy is in the cutting the paddy, which one is planted or something. I don't know where he's getting that from. Is not the laborer poor? Does not your paddy often ripen for those who did not plant it? Are there not many wrongs in your country? Is not the number of your children small? He's saying, like, if you're good to your people, you'll get right with Allah, and then He'll bless you, with all these riches. But like right now, your village is poor. You don't have the gamelan orchestra playing music. Your kids aren't laughing and playing in the paddy fields because, you're not being magnanimous enough right now. Basically, all right. Now I don't know if that's really a strong argument. Okay. The book already tells you that this guy's headed for disaster. So apparently this wasn't enough to win over the chiefs of Labak. Okay. Um, Chiefs of Obak, we have often committed faults, and our country is poor because we have committed so many faults. I'm your friend. I'm here to tell you. I'm telling you this because I'm your friend. I'm delivering the hard news. That's what you got to do. So that's his inspiring speech. Okay. Then they tell us here, you see that Havilar was truly a poet. That he's speaking of the rice fields, in the mountains, whatever. Um, he reminds you of the prophets of the Old Testament. He was something of a seer, right? So this author, Shulman, okay, is really thinks Max Havelaar had the gift of gab, uh, but he says he didn't even think that it was poetry. It was just the way he talked. Um, let's see what else there was. Okay, it appears he had paused with premeditation at the end of his speech, and there was a reason for it. What must the chiefs have thought of his knowing already that so many had left Labak with bitterness in their hearts? So apparently, Max Havelaar knew, when he's telling the chiefs, like, your land is poor, he's saying, like, I know what's really going on here, okay? And this author's saying, what would they think of that? The fact that he knew that, the fact that he knew that families had left Labak and emigrated to neighboring countries to avoid the poverty that reigned there. The fact that he knew that, the fact that he knew that um, there were people there who didn't like the Dutch government. Okay, why is he saying that? What's he aiming at? Okay, what's the point? And he says most of them looked at the ground. Okay, while Max Havelaar is like telling them this stuff. All right. Then he also says, hey, we're all at the service of the King of Holland. Let's not forget. But he who is just and desires that we perform our duty is far from here. Okay? So, the King of Holland might be a great guy, but he's over in Holland. Furthermore, we got like 30,000 people over here, right, in Labak, I guess, in this town. All right? And the king can't be here, and he's depending on us to take care of these people. So there's that too. There's that law, like, from Holland. Us Dutch people, we got to be good colonial administrators. We're going to do justice. All right. Um, Now, he says here that, like, if somebody dies and he didn't pay the laborers' wages and he lived off the food of the poor and he became rich from the poverty of others, in other words, if somebody died and he was remembered as a slave owner, uh, people just forget about him. They'd curse him. They'd say, screw that guy. And he says, look, we're all going to die sometime. What are people going to say about you when you die? Well, wouldn't you like them, to like weep, cry that you're dead and miss you, and say, oh, he was great. We miss him. You know, this is your chance to be that like that. Okay. And then he says, I want to be on good terms with you, so I beg you to regard me as your friend. Everyone who has erred may reckon on a lenient sentence from me. So, like, done anything wicked recently, if like, forgive that. I'll give you a break. I'll give you a pass. I make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Okay? Ordinary mistakes. As long as it doesn't become custom. Okay? Not a mistake, just custom. I won't oppose it. Now remember, there's that problem with custom. Like, everybody wants to like be supportive of their regent. Like, everybody has this like innate desire to make the regent happy. Okay, so he says only where negligence becomes custom. He's saying, like, you have a responsibility to take care of those people too. Okay, and you certainly can't be tyrannical and you can't extort them. No tyranny, extortion. And then, if Allah preserve us alive, we shall take care that prosperity comes. Now, I don't think Max Havelaar was ever claimed to be a Muslim. But again, he's being made out to be, this superhero. Now there's this guy, Joxa, he's like the sheriff. He knows what happened to the previous assistant resident, the one who got killed. He wants to give some inside information here to Max Havelaar, but the regent's there, and there's this hierarchy among the Javanese, and he can't talk to Max Havelaar when the regent's around. Um, and the regents here, they want money. Okay, they're talking about money, and this is where Havelaar gets generous and says, I'll go ahead and give you a credit or something. I'll give you an advance. And this guy Verbruge, the controller's saying, like that seems crazy, I don't get it. And Havelaar says, look, here's the reality. The regent doesn't actually have any money. Okay, I checked into this. The regent's writer it isn't even getting paid. Okay, he says the tax gatherer is willing to give him an advance, and I'd rather that I'd be irresponsible with um, the Dutch government's revenues than leave a man of the regent's rank and years in perplexity. I want the regent on my side. Okay. Moreover, people at Labac abuse their power in a fearful way. You ought to know that. And he says, yeah. And he says, I know it. And I know it. And he's saying, well, I know about some dirty stuff the regent did, and this guy didn't know it. And he said, and then Max Havelaar goes on to have this sort of Socratic dialogue. Now, the book really gets silly here, okay? Um, the author really copies Plato here. I did a video on Plato where I talk about this, what I call a comic book style, where Socrates is getting people to agree to him. He's asking questions and saying things and getting his opponents to agree with everything he's saying. That's what's happening here. This Verbruge, the controller, okay, he's silent. He's agreeing with him. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And Max Havelaar's, talking about the long term here and, building mosques and stuff like that and like doing things that are good for improving the land and all that kind of stuff. Um, let's see. Okay, so the regent, apparently has done enough of this stuff that it's left him poor. And so we want to encourage the regent to keep doing some of this stuff. And so now the controller says, hey, Mr. Havelaar, I never served anyone under anyone like you. And Max Havelaar is like, yeah, there's not too many people like me. And the controller says, you speak differently from the others. And he says, Max Havelaar says, not everyone can be a prophet or apostle. Wood would soon be too dear because of the crucifying. All right. So I'm not going to make you read too much more of this book. Okay. It's kind of two dimensional at this point, but I think it's kind of interesting what the author does. The author, as I said, pretends to be this coffee broker. And, he's this coffee broker with the heart of stone, right? He doesn't really care about virtue or anything like that, okay? So he's taking a break here to comment on what Stern has translated so far, okay? All right, so Mr. Drystubble says, I learned from Stern's scribblings and Schulman's parcel the fact that no coffee's planted in Labac. Now, we already talked about that, okay? Labac is, the people are living on the brink of starvation, okay? They need to grow rice. They don't have a lot of land to grow anything on, okay? Furthermore, they say that the soil in Labac is not suitable for growing coffee. It's not good coffee land, okay? And he says, I think these people are mistaken. Okay, he says I think the government of Holland needs to read what's been written so far with a different point of view. Okay, he says first of all, saying that the soil's not fit for coffee, that's no excuse. First of all, it neglects the interests of Holland generally. Okay. What are you doing out there if you're not, like what's the government of Holland doing managing land that doesn't produce any coffee? Okay. Um, and he says, um, the people there, if they can't make it, if they can't grow coffee there, they should move somewhere else. Like, let's start right there. They should move to other places where the ground is good for coffee. Like, get the hell out of Lubbock. Now, then he goes on to reminisce about this preacher that he heard. He's got a weird name. First he takes a pause to, bark at his son, Fred, about yanking on the maidservant's dress and making a mess or something like that, this guy. All right, so and then he gets back to the Shulman's parcel full of rubbish, but says, I'm reminded of this preacher. He calls him Parson Walwalar, okay? All right, so he's all of a sudden seems to remember like a ton of stuff that this that this preacher once said. Okay, said this preacher talked about the Javanese and other pagans. Fred says that the Javanese are no pagans, but I call everyone who has wrong faith a pagan. Right? He says here I'm gonna give some extracts from the sermon that this parson gave when he was talking about this. Now he starts off by saying that these people they haven't been converted. Okay, let's start right there. These Javanese, Malays, whatever the hell you want to call them, they haven't been converted. All right, and then the quotes start. Such, my beloved, was the vocation of Israel. He meant the destruction of the inhabitants of Canaan. All right, a vocation is like your job. So I guess this preacher started off by saying that Israel's job was to destroy the inhabitants of Canaan. All right. Okay. And then this preacher said, such is the vocation of Holland. How about that? So we Dutch, we also have to destroy the inhabitants of Canaan or whatever. All right. So anyway, these people down here, these millions of people, they're children of the accursed son, and of the rightly accursed son of the noble God serving Noah. So I don't know which son of that they're talking about, but they creep in the disgusting snake holes of pagan ignorance. There they bow the black woolly head under the yoke of selfish priests. There they worship God, invoking a false prophet that has an abomination in the eyes of the Lord. And beloved, as if it were not enough to obey a false prophet, there are even those among them who worship another god, or rather other gods. Yes, gods of wood and stone, which they themselves have made in their own image, black, abominable, with flat noses, and devilish. Yes, beloved, tears almost arrest me, for deeper still is the depravity of the race of Ham. So I guess that was the son of Noah he's referring to. I'm a little rusty on that part of the Bible. So there are amongst them that know no God under any name whatsoever, who think it's sufficient to obey laws, society, whatever. Okay. Anyway, these people are ignorant. Do you not shiver with horror at this picture? Does not your heart shrink when you think of what will be the fate of all these fools as soon as the trumpet shall sound, which will summon the dead and separate the faithful from the unfaithful? Like, yeah, I mean, don't you worry about the eternal souls of these people? You know? They're going to burn in hell forever. And, look at all the nasty stuff they do to like kids and all that kind of stuff. And look, our God's a God of love. He wants these people to be saved. And he chose Holland to go out and do it. So, these people right now are kind of experiencing hell on earth because they're pagans, but, we have a chance to fix that. We have a chance to cure them of their superstitions and stuff. So we have some, like duties that we have to fulfill. So he thinks that's really what's going on here with, Schalman and Max Havelaar. Like, they don't get it. Like they got everything backwards. He's got this interesting list of things like they got to do. Okay. He's like, yeah, we Dutch people. Okay. Maybe we have some obligation to do something. So, missionary societies, we got to uh, print the Bible, um, you know, let the Javanese take a tour of some of our warships. um, let them meet some of our merchants, let them talk to the sailors so they can be instructed about the kingdom of God. And he says down here, order that Javanese by labor be educated to the kingdom of God. All right. Now he says, did you pay attention to that? That educate to the kingdom of God part? Well, I wasn't kidding. Now here's where he says, well, Bach might actually do very well for coffee culture. All right. It may be that God just made the ground unfit for coffee culture so that people would have a way to earn their way back into heaven. Okay. So he's like, what these people need to do, I missed it here. Okay. All right. So if they say the soil's no good there, then maybe what they need to do is make the soil better. All right? Make the soil better. And that labor will like make them fit for salvation, and then God will, shine his good grace on them. All right? That's my solution. That's what you're saying. That's what I'm supposed to do. That's how we should do it. All right, so there you go. Now I'm gonna stop reading the book there. I don't know that there's much point in continuing on. But I'll point out a few things. Um, First of all, this book did have political effect. Okay. The Dutch ultimately adopted what they call this ethical policy. Now, it kind of sucked. Okay. But it involved at some point building schools. And by 1928, nearly 6,500 locals had achieved secondary school education. Now, to say that that's a tiny proportion of the population, yeah, that's an understatement. That's like, 0.001% or something of the population there getting secondary education, basically, literacy. All right. Now, what's interesting about that is that those 6,500, even though it's a tiny, tiny group of people, included this guy who would go on to become the founder of the country. Okay, they say down here, he went to 1916. Okay, went to a secondary school in Surabaya. That's in Java. Okay, and these people, they got educated. These people became like nationalists. Now this guy went on to become, I guess, kind of a communist. Okay, I mean, well, okay. While he was president of the country, Indonesia developed the third largest communist party in the world. Um, but then, that communist party it's got wiped out in a period of about 6 months there, a year. But anyway, one time there was some real communism going on there. So this book, had some indirect kind of spillover effects. I skipped past it. One second here. Um, if you pull up the Wikipedia page for this book, they tell you it played a key role in shaping and modifying Dutch colonial policy. So, um, what happened really shouldn't be that hard for modern people to understand. Um, People in Holland suddenly became aware of all these human rights abuses that just no one had told them about. Okay. We sort of take, today you can read something on the news that says, they're using slave labor to make, some electronic product or something in China or wherever. And you're just like, yeah, what else is new? I've been hearing about that, since the 90s or whatever. But that wasn't true in in the 1860s. Nobody had heard this before, even though the Dutch had been, present and doing business in Java since for about 250 years at that point. Okay, so Marx Again, this is not about Marx, but Marx, when he was writing about contemporary events. He's saying, "Hey, I was here in London. Last 10 years, this is what I saw." So he thought he saw the future. Everybody's going to be building factories, and it's all going to be factory owners exploiting the labor of the factory workers. That's the way. That's the way it's going to go. And he was basing that on this narrow sliver of time that he'd seen. This person was lifting the veil on centuries of colonial exploitation. And so, people felt bad. People really felt bad about that. And so that's led to, these reform policies that ultimately, didn't go anywhere. Um, but I think it might be in some ways analogous to the modern era in that, we often don't learn about what our country's been up to, okay, until long after, it's already happened, right? So if there was a period of time when the US government was out building schools, trying to improve the lifestyle of people in the country, and that turned out to be a failure, well, there might not have been a lot of reporting about it at the time, and we might only learn about it after the fact. We might only learn about it long after the fact. There may be things our government has done that we still don't know about, right? That's kind of the situation the Dutch people found themselves in when this book was published. And so, again, it's not Marx, okay? But it's an illustration of a phenomenon that I think has repeated since then, right? We've had books like The Jungle, um, and that's notwithstanding all of the books that have been published sort of in the Marxist tradition, or the books that employ Marxist analysis, right? But how often does someone sit down and write an expose that takes you into all the intimate details of what your government or anyone's government is doing in another country where they have totally different customs, different history, and we're interfacing with locals and we're reliant on locals to run things. And how many people will sit down and actually write about it? And for that matter, you have to think about the author of this book. I guess I didn't read his Wikipedia page. I should have seen, if anything, what became of him. I don't know. Did he ever have any real success? Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. It says he stopped writing suddenly after 77. He moved to Germany. He tried to write plays or something like that. Looks like he was afraid of the Dutch king. I don't know. Sigmund Freud liked him. Let's see. Several other writers from different generations were appreciative, like Karl Marx. Like, okay. Karl Marx, like, hey, thanks. Although, I don't know. It seems like I don't know when Das Kapital came out, but it was like right around this time. So I don't know how much time Karl Marx had to study any of this stuff. Anyway, this video wasn't going to be about Marx, and I hope it wasn't about Marx. And I hope that people found this informative and thought provoking. And I'll leave it there. Signing off. I'm the regular guy. Take care.